Bonjour, Niji. Hello, friends.
Hi there.
Good morning.
Hi, Toonie and Sharon.
Hi. I'm trying to get my video up, but I can't. It's hooked up. But niałe scano.
Okay, somebody just admitted Toonie. So, John, can we help her?
Quite
How's that?
possibly. If you go to the bottom left of your screen.
Yep, I just did that. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Very good.
Yes.
Okay. Now we scan.
Bravo. Thank you for sharing.
Wonderful.
Good morning,
Your
everyone.
greeting.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a video icon in the bottom left, and that'll give you at least on and off. So we can try that out first. If not, you're going to have to go to the up caret next to the video and then video settings to potentially choose your webcam.
Okay. I think can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Good morning.
Oh, good deal.
Hi.
Good deal. Hello.
Mhm.
Good morning, Skuksierik.
Oh, beautiful. Good morning.
All right. Oops, sorry, Suzanne. I'm going to hand this off. I'm going to blip off on the video and then hand it off to the team. Thank you very much here. Please, we have a lot of people in the background that can help out. So just say anything you want into the microphone and then we'll be able to go live and help you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
I like your scarf, Suzanne.
Thank you. A friend gave it to me years ago. From you recognize that it is hand done. I forget what country.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I treasure all of the Aboriginal. I think this is from Canada and Aboriginal peoples of Canada. So are we ready, Lee and Daryl?
Yes, I believe so. I think we got everyone in. I'm showing 27 participants, which is good. John?
Yep, we're clear and nobody's
Okay.
in the waiting room.
Okay.
Lee, you're in charge of the PowerPoint, so.
Lee, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
So
Okay.
it's up to you to get started.
Yeah. You can start us off and then go through the slides.
John? Are we going through the instructions and so forth, or are we just getting right into it?
We're pretty much getting right into it. If anyone would like any kind of help with anything, you can individually chat us. Thank you for participating in the chat, adding your greetings inside there. We have a great presentation today. Daryl and Lee will be presenting, and at this point, Lee, you're in charge of moving the slides forward and back, and I'll be in the background, so if you need anything, just say my name.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Lomatalangba. It's a beautiful day in Hopi. Today, Daryl and I will be facilitating a webinar on holistic traditional healing services in tribal vocational rehabilitation.
Lee,
Yes.
you need to get closer to the microphone.
Yes.
We're losing you.
Now,
That's better. Thank you.
the learning outcomes for today's webinar is upon completion of the webinar, the participants will know how AIVRS program regulations allow expenditures for services reflecting the cultural background of tribal consumers being served, including tribal healing practitioners. Learning Objective 2, participants will know how traditional healing services will affect consumers' employment outcome. Learning Objective 3, participants will know how to identify and document appropriate traditional healing services in IPEs. And Learning Objective 4, participants will, yes,
You need to change the slide. Thank you.
okay.
Yes.
Yes, Learning Objective 4, participants will know how to maintain confidentiality when procuring cultural relevant services for consumers.
Okay, hello everyone. Lumat Langway, this is Daryl Joseph. It's good to see all of you out there. Before we get started with this next slide, I do want to do a land acknowledgement of the space that we occupy. I think respectfully of the spaces you occupy. If you see my background here, it's of our San Francisco peaks here in northern Arizona. It's very sacred to our people, the Hopi people, including 11 or 12 other indigenous tribes of northern Arizona. And it's on the homeland sacred to our Native American region through this area. And in recognizing that, we want to honor our past, our present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home. And respectfully, you know, the same goes for the spaces you're in at the moment, to recognize that as well. So for us to get started, you know, thinking about traditional healing services, there's a lot, and I think during our time with AIVRTech, we've always had a lot of questions around this topic with regards to what does it mean, how do we do it, is there funding available, what are the regulations around it. And so we start with that today and looking at the RSA regulations as it relates to traditional healing services in the 34 CFR 37.41. So looking at that, we do have an area in our AIVRS regulations that outline the services being required. And as we go through today's presentation, we would encourage you as participants to think about more broadly about your community, your consumers, their experience or involvement with you know, their traditional cultures and how they might approach you asking for traditional healing services. Because it's not a black and white answer. It really requires a lot of conversation. And so with that, you know, if we review the AIVRS regulations, it clearly says that there are expenditures for services reflecting the cultural background of the American Indians being served, including treatment provided by native healing practitioners who are recognized as such by the Tribal Vocational Rehabilitation Program. So that really situates you as a program to make those interpretations. When the services are necessary to assist an individual with disabilities to achieve his or her vocational rehabilitation objective. And so there's no argument that this definition is broad enough that allows you to determine how you go about, how you qualify traditional healing services, and how you work with your consumer to determine if it's needed and how you go about doing that. So in thinking about that, I'm asking, you know, we ask you as AIVRTech to reflect on some things for important consideration. So most importantly is considering the cultural background of the consumer that you are serving. So for example, you know, if we're looking at a person within, we'll just use Lee's and I's Hopi tribe as an example. We know, for instance, that in many of our community members follow a Hopi traditional, cultural system, in the sense that there are some ceremonies or traditions that are pretty consistent throughout the community, which include things like offering a morning prayer, to our Father, Son in the morning. And in doing this, we typically will ask for personal guidance and protection, and prayer for the universe. And that's kind of universal, among indigenous communities. More specifically, sometimes we honor the spirits, that are out there. In Hopi, we'll put out a pinch of our food before we take a bite of our meal, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, as an offering, to pay homage and respect to our clan deities, our ancestral spirits, and things like that. Morning runs are very important. I know that's very, it's a positivistic outlook on our daily lives, that we're through our run, we're engaged in acquiring strength from our Father, Son. We're running for a purpose. Another examples are storytelling. We will typically gather during certain times of the year to tell stories, and then in that find individuals who have good hearts, so to speak, to tell the stories and share that with the community. And then values such as demonstrating reciprocity without being asked, just being able to give back, only taking what you need. And most importantly, using things like humor and celebration as we're engaged in these processes of practicing our ceremonies from our cultural background. Some other examples include practicing or offering powwows for traditional ceremonies, engaging in subsistence living, which is a cultural livelihood, and sharing with our extended family and the community. So within that, there are a lot of ways that we can, as programs and counselors, examine what does the cultural background of our consumers look like. As you know, some of us may have grown up very entrenched in some of those traditional upbringings. Some of us may have not grown up that way, but are trying to acquire the learning of that. So as a program, we suggest that you identify collectively within your staff, what does that look like for you? What is the cultural background? And once we come up with that idea, then we start talking about, okay, what types of traditional healing services would be appropriate. So, looking at this idea of treatment provided by a healing practitioner, we have been exposed to programs out there who offer smudging, or ask traditional healer to provide smudging. Looking at traditional plants or use of native plants for illness, offering a private healing service by a traditional healer to restore balance. Looking at, sweat lodges, through a group prayer. And then obviously just, everyday prayers, drumming, fasting, feasting, and use of sacred objects. So there really is, as a community, when we think about that dimension, many things for us to consider. So looking back at this definition, again, it reminds us that there are two things here. One, that we're including treatment provided by a native healing practitioner recognized by a tribal vocational rehabilitation program. Secondly, that these services are necessary to assist an individual with disabilities to achieve her employment outcome or vocational goal. So thinking about those two things, the onus is on us as a program to come up with what traditional healing services might look like and how we offer them as a program in terms of accounting for that service in the plan. So next slide, Lee. Go ahead and click again. we'll just put the whole diagram up. One more click. Oh, maybe not one more click. I guess we put a lot of clicks in there. Okay, here we go. So here's the full picture, okay? So we know that in our federal requirements, when we talk generally about vocational rehabilitation, as it applies to individuals with disabilities, we consider two primary factors that include physical and mental health in terms of accounting for that in our service provisions. When we tag on the very unique perspective of Indigenous communities, which is our AIVRS requirements, we also consider the spiritual and we consider the emotional, okay? And we know that. And so when we present this idea that there is a holistic traditional service delivery model, we like to use this diagram to indicate that there are four components of an individual that are very important so that we're fulfilling the purpose of serving the individual as a whole. You'll see in our diagram here that the environment is very important, you know, that it surrounds everything. And as we know, just in the sense of our land acknowledgement, environmental factors are important in the sense that we relate to our space. As you know, we think about it in our tradition as a spiritual concept. We have an emotional concept connection to our environment, which informs our physical and our mental. So there are important considerations as to what does this mean when we think about the cultural background and the use of traditional healing services that affects or guides the consumer in preparing for, obtaining, and maintaining employment, okay? This really needs to be discussed during the IPE development by the VR counselor and the consumer. So in consideration of that, you know, as directors and those of you who are counselors on board right now, again, we encourage that these things are engaged with your consumer in a very intimate process, you know, so requiring a lot of trust building and open communication with your consumers. AIVRS counselors should be attentive to the level of engagement in the use of traditional practices in the consumer's daily activity, and then become familiar with this during the time of intake or through the formative development of the relationship between the VR counselor and the consumer. So when we think about this, the awareness, you know, if requested, the type, the level and duration of traditional healing services should be presented through your conversation and then included as part of your IPE services. Conversations with your consumer should also include how they believe in traditional healing and how they believe it will impact their ability to achieve their vocational goal or achieve their employment outcome. So again, you know, two factors that are very important in terms of considering traditional healing. So a quick question for all of you, if you can turn to your chat box. We want to ask you a question, and the question is, how do we evaluate a consumer's cultural background and use of traditional healing services? So if you were to consider that for your program, how would you evaluate that? And I'm just going to copy and paste this question here in the chat box so you can read it for yourself. But if you wouldn't mind responding and being open and honest as well, you know, if you feel that you need, your program needs some work in this area, that, you know, we welcome you to present that. If you're attempting to define that and are just generating that process, please let us know. This is an open community for us to share and provide knowledge so that we can all co-construct this concept together. So I'll give you a few seconds if you can respond to that in the chat box.
Daryl, I'm going to copy paste it one more time. We just had someone come in right after you copy pasted it. And also, we had a number of phone calls come in, and I just want to remind everyone that if you want to raise your hand, you can press *9, and that will also lower your hand. But also, if you'd like to unmute, that is *6, and then *6 to mute yourself again. Thank you.
And for those people on the phone, I know you can't see the screen, but if you want to chime in, as John said, *6 is the function to unmute yourself. And the question again is, how do we evaluate a consumer's cultural background and use of traditional healing services? Suzanne, I think we assigned you as a chat box person. So would you like to read Christopher's or the responses coming through?
Sure. Sorry, I muted myself. So I was reading away here. So Charlene Hadley, if the client feels like the services has helped them, then it would be considered a success. Everybody keep these in mind, and if you want to expand any kind of conversation with that would be great. Jamie Emmanuel writes in-person interview and conversations. Christopher is does not object to talking, so maybe he would like to read it or expand on it. But Christopher writes, I was thrown for a loop once when a consumer told me she did not want to receive cultural or traditional services as they related to her tribe. She said those practices were taboo for her. She had grown up on the reservation but belonged to a mainstream religion, and that religion was her culture, she said. Wow. 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 I have so many comments I'd like to make on that, but I think that many of them are a personal point of view, so I think I better not get into that. Christopher, do you want to expand on that? How did you work that out?
I just honored where she was at. So
yeah, that's all you could do.
If culture was her religious practice, then that's where she was. So talking any further about her tribe or their traditions or culture that might have been part of their history was not where she wanted to go.
Right, and how did you, in terms of then if a tribal, here's a question, maybe not just for Christopher, but if a tribal person is looking to another source as a cultural, then how do we address that? If they're choosing a religion as part of their culture, are we honoring something that she may want? You know, I think we've had this conversation before. Do we provide Bibles? So this is something to consider. Thank you for that. Thank you for your input on that. It's really important. Anybody else want to make a comment on anything so far?
Suzanne, maybe we can go through the comments first.
Okay.
And then we'll pick up, let's just see what everyone else is saying, and then we can respond to that generally.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. So, Lorraine, thank you. We have 12 different tribes on this reservation, so we have to ask and let the customer let us know what they consider healing services. Good. Rachel Allen, listening to their needs, and often the traditional healer will be the one who does the assessment. Sharon Pattison, we generally tend to wait for them to ask for a service. We are now looking to get a list of providers for cultural traditions and healers and make it known to them during an intake. We offer it right up front. Selena Reyes, through intake and follow-up meetings with consumers. The individual consumer will also assist staff in researching traditional services, of course, if they prefer to utilize traditional services. Right. Tuni Pierce, during interview, and sometimes not everyone understands their own historical trauma until they are asked. Good point. These are all good points. Thank you. Susie Calhoun. This begins at the intake with learning about our consumer with what do I'm not seeing? Conservate? I'm not saying that one. Conservation, thank you. Then it builds from there. I think I need new reading glasses. Casey Bird, as the counselor, I always discuss this service during program planning and IPE development. If a client has interest, we go further. If the client already is involved in any traditional healing services, we include whatever she would like to include on his or her IPE. Some clients have interest and others have no interest. I have many clients who know nothing about traditional healing, so I arrange for them to meet with an elder or a tribal member who is willing to teach them about the healing culture. Wow, these are such great answers. Rachel, we support that. It is not our plan, our place to try to push another view on them. Minnie Stephen, to me, hearing their voice and sounding very happy sounds like a success to me. Amanda Race, we have provided a Barnes & Noble gift card for school books, including what the consumer needed for emotional support that was appropriate for them. Christopher Zeiler, in my routine first meeting with a new consumer, I asked them about the following: family health, relationship health, social health, mental health, physical health, nutritional health, medical health, emotional health, financial health, spiritual health. I let them know they can answer my inquiries as honestly as they are comfortable doing. Right on. Susie Calhoun, we respect and support each person's view and are not here to judge a person's path, but to assist in their journey of healing. Wow. Wow.
Ooh, it's quite.
Bravo.
This is that's a testament to how this should be a talking circle. You know, there are a lot of factors to consider with respect to our individual communities, the unique identities as it relates to each consumer, the variance or spectrum of representation in terms of a person's connection to a cultural background and how they might define that. And I think most importantly, what has come out in your responses is the idea that you know, the primary foundation in having a conversation about what traditional healing services looks like and how we can provide it relies heavily on a relationship between the counselor and the consumer, and how well a level of trust is developed. Because as we engage in that relationship, there are things that, as Susie indicates here, that you know, they're on a journey, right? And we know that each of them are in our program because services are needed. We know that the specific requirement around the RSA regulation for traditional healing services is to address a historical legacy of trauma within our communities that can be interpreted in many different ways. And how our knowledge base and our interpretation of that history also is perceived in various different ways. So you can see that there's a lot of, there's much requirement by a program and their staff to have familiarity and capacity to engage in a conversation about this, but also to understand that there is a spectrum of representation out there, so that we're not putting our program in a position to, you know, put consumers in a situation where we're making them feel like we're judging them or that they should be seeking a specific type of traditional healing. That should be a conversation that's co-produced between you, the counselor, and the consumer. So with that, we also have to respect that there are, with traditional healing services, respecting the level of confidentiality that exists between the individual, the consumer, and if in any case, you know, they are seeking a traditional healer out. And what does this mean when we look at an individual program's policy and procedure? If I were to ask the directors at the moment, is there a policy and procedure specifically related to how traditional healing is defined, how it's provided, how we paid for it, and how confidentiality is respected? You know, I could almost guarantee we'll have a variance in our responses. But as you know, through AIVRTAC, one of the things we encourage is that your policy and procedure really is the framework for how you apply, you know, these federal regulations around AIVRS. Okay, so next slide, Lee.
Daryl, we have a couple of important messages from from our listener, our participants. Do you want to read them now or you want to wait?
I would go ahead and read them if.
Okay.
Yeah.
From Anita, I approach traditional healing by using culturally relevant approaches that are in line with the consumer's cultural beliefs and practices. If I use the term traditional healing, the person isn't as receptive than they are with cultural relevant approaches. I think that's an important distinction there, and I appreciate that, you know, that vision of knowing that some words impact people differently. Karen Johnson talks about some consumers are struggling with culture, especially if they are coming out of incarceration. They feel unworthy. We discuss cultural cures. I offer referrals for tribal healers who can provide a welcome home ceremony. She also says, it is also something veterans might ask for coming out of the service. So again, we thank all of you for your comments. Over to you, Jerry.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. Lee, your next up.
Okay, before I talk about the next slide, I want to acknowledge the comments that were shared by the participants.
Beautiful.
To me, that's an indication that you are the experts of knowing your communities, knowing your tribal history, language, traditions, and practices. And we highly recommend that you take the time to tap into these resources that you do have: personal resources, family resources, community resources. So what we are presenting today is basically a recommendation. We rely on you as the program staff to have the expertise to apply what you know will work for your communities and for the consumers that you are serving. And it certainly makes sense to include the family in these type of discussion so that they too will know what the consumer is confronting, and also will be part of the discussion as to how they can assist the consumers to move forward in pursuing their employment outcome. So as Daryl has covered the regulation about understanding culturally appropriate services, more specifically, the definition for traditional healing services is covered by 34 CFR 371.41A2. And I believe in our conference presentation, our on-site visits with the program, our year one visits with the programs, we provided everyone with a copy of that particular regulation. And through our webinars and talking circles, we have also made it a point to make reference to that regulation and have provided recommendation that you become familiar as that is specific to the AIVRS program. Another area of consideration is reviewing your grant proposal to understand how traditional services and the manner in which it will be provided is described in your grant proposal. This is important because as part of your outreach to your communities, this would be a service that you would highlight and also provide the opportunity for the community members and your potential consumers to engage in a discussion as to their understanding regarding traditional healing services. And for those folks who may not necessarily be engaged in tradition, they can also be provided some type of support that exists within the community to tap into those resources. Another area to concentrate on is with your current consumers, your potential consumers, and having a discussion with them to better understand how they define traditional healing services. As we know, across the country, when we're talking about the word disability, in many of our tribal communities, there is no one definition for the word disability. And when we're talking about disability, perhaps the interpretation may be more descriptive in nature. And oftentimes, the discussion will lead to how in the past we have served that population and not necessarily looked at a disability as an impediment to community participation, but rather focus on their abilities to determine how they can contribute to the community. So I believe there's a difference when we're talking about disability from the Western standard of defining disability and employment, and then switching that around and looking at from the cultural lenses as to how we have worked with those individuals with disabilities. So it's not necessarily segregating those tribal members, but finding a way that they're always included in the community life. Another area to consider is getting to know your community perspective regarding traditional healing services. And in this regard, you would learn how traditional healing services is a resource that may still be available within your tribal communities. And what would be the accepted protocol to pursue the services of traditional healing services. In many cases, this may be a private matter where you don't necessarily need to know the details of how a consumer will seek the resources of a traditional healing services, but be cognizant as to how you would indicate the preferred method in your case note, in the procurement of services, the payment for the services. Next slide. As I mentioned, using the previous slide, American Indians, Alaska Perspective on Disabilities, some of the bulleted items that I'll cover is the first one. Most American Indians and Alaska Natives do not have one word to describe or define disability.
Lee, we're losing you.
And this may be the case in your tribal communities, that you don't have one word to define disability. In the Native American communities, we also believe that the human being is made up of the body, mind, soul, and spirit. So when we're talking about a holistic approach to serving our consumers, we can bring into mind the model that we have developed for this presentation and have also shared this paradigm, if you will, in our presentations at conferences, our visits during our ITA site visits. In tribal communities, unwellness or illness is often looked at as a disharmony in the mind, body, soul, and spirit. In some tribal communities, it's also believed that illness is caused by violation of a taboo or sacred tribal custom. Furthermore, in our tribal communities, there is a belief that if one of the four is out of harmony, the whole being is out of harmony. And lastly, in our tribal communities, and this may not be unique just to the tribal community, is to believe that each one of us is responsible for our own wellness. So with that in mind, as we work with our consumers, keeping in mind that informed choice is very important, that it's not that we're dictating to the consumers as to what is the best approach to incorporating traditional healing services as part of the IPE, but learning from them and having them decide how they will use traditional healing services as a resource toward achieving their vocational goal. At this time, are there any comments that the participants would like to share? Any thoughts or reflection on what I just shared with the group?
Perhaps, Shara, are there any taboos that you're aware of?
Lee,
Yes.
perhaps we can, we asked a couple of questions within the slide
Yes.
to the audience. Maybe we can copy and paste that into the chat box. Would you like me to do that?
Sure.
And then we can ask the audience to respond that way. So I'm copying and pasting, and the question that I think we would like to learn from you is, some examples of culturally appropriate practices within the context of community integration for American Indian and Alaska Natives with disabilities. So as we think about that, what are the things that you're doing as we speak about cultural appropriateness and services, and maybe in this case, traditional healing? What are your programs doing right now? If you could list some examples, that would be great. We'll give you a, go ahead.
No, Daryl, you want to read Casey's? Casey Bird has responded to your question.
Okay, Casey, thank you, Casey. We have learned here at our program that involving our clients in classes that teach them about their heritage and culture and teach them how to do the arts and crafts of their culture provides healing for some. Thank you, Casey. And as people are responding, I think that's a very important. As we all know, and I'm taking this out of context a little, but I think it's a reflection of, the systemic issues we have when we talk about awareness of our own cultural understandings or connection to community. In the responses earlier, some of you mentioned historical trauma. If we go back and briefly talk about boarding school systems, genocide, removal from traditional homelands and placed on lands not known to, in terms of their indigenous connection to land. All of these things have perpetuated itself through present day. And so when we think about that, and then on top of that, think about how we've learned about education, there's a lot that we have to wrestle with as being indigenous people, as it relates to operating within a larger system. And when we talk about vocational rehabilitation, we understand that we're focused on helping individuals find employment. From what perspective? From a Western perspective, does that mean working 8 to 5, making a wage? Or is that from the perspective of subsistence living, self-employment? And I think things like Casey's recommending is very important. That there are pockets of our people who do need some support services out there that are culturally appropriate, and therefore we ask you that question: what is your community doing for our consumers who might need support in that area? So Suzanne, I see some comments coming through. You want to start with that?
Yes. James Walker, traditional food. How do we eat within our ceremonies and culture? Kim Malik, if I destroy your name, please, I'll apologize now. Attending drum ceremonies, regalia, making sweat lodges, naming ceremonies. Bravo. American Race, we have food preparation, why we do the things at our traditional funerals or ceremonies, teach beadwork or crafts that are not always taught within some families. Sharon Pettis and Seneca has also held a cultural series to help our consumers learn through speakers, hands-on crafts. I have shared this with other VR programs, what we did, and now we are putting together a laundry list to share with consumers. Bravo, these are awesome. One of the things that I'm noticing from some of the comments is that there is a recognition of culture changing. All cultures change over time, if they're allowed to, without being forced to change. And so when you're sensitive enough to know that you're introducing historical cultural activities that your tribes have done for eons of time, this helps that healing process that has been mentioned before in terms of historic trauma, and then also addressing poverty, generational poverty. And so this is all really so significant, and thank you so much for sharing. Daryl?
Yep, and then we had one more comment from Selena that I just want to read out here. She says that we here at Fort Mojave TVR, we had prior to the pandemic cultural tours, Mojave language courses, traditional regalia making, beading, pottery making, as well as storytelling, traditional song, and dance, which all took place in partnership with our tribal cultural department. We have our own wellness center where the nutritionists worked with the consumers in learning to make traditional foods that are healthy. A majority of our consumers who come out of a long-term incarceration need to relearn who they are as a Mojave woman or man.
Beautiful.
Very, very important, Selena, and thank you. So just a brief response. I mean, what everyone is sharing, those are very specific examples for things within your community. And I guess the question is, how do we translate that into a policy document for providing this type of service to your consumers? How do we make that tangible? How are you doing that through the articulation of that policy? And how do your counselors communicate and then facilitate the process of getting that service that the consumer needs? I think those are the important follow-up questions, because all your responses are highlighting the resilience of our native or indigenous people. You know, we are strong people. We have endured so much over time that, you know, for a program like AIVRS to have a specific regulation on native healing is so, I think, a strength of our program. And depending on how we understand this, it could be one of the major factors in leveraging the resilience of our own people. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here that we can take advantage of based on what you're sharing within your chat. And then taking that and translating that into some policy documents, and then actually making it tangible for your consumers. And I think, Selena, also I want to share here that, you know, the other piece that we aren't talking about today specifically is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We understand that many of you as tribal VR programs have followed your tribe's protocols in a sense of either, you know, being closed, having your offices closed for a time, and then having to relearn a new way to provide services. You know, my understanding, some of you are working from home. Some of you are using technology to facilitate services to some degree. And then there are some where, you know, we're still trying to figure out, based on our disparities with technology, you know, that there may not be connection with consumers. And so this movement, I think, is also creating the need for us to develop and identify new ways to keep the thread of our resilience through how we provide services to our consumers. You know, how are we doing that? How are you doing that as a program? And I think that's very important as we move forward, as you think about your programmatic activities around this topic today. So with that, we can go to the next slide.
Oh, before we go to the next slide, I would like to encourage the programs to share these stories in your annual performance report.
Lee, you need to talk up. You're disappearing.
Can you hear me now?
Better? Yes, thank you.
Okay. What I was saying is I encourage the programs to share these stories with RSA as part of your annual performance report. They need to know how it is different in serving tribal consumers within their respective communities. More importantly, they need to understand and respect how AIVRS is doing business for its target population. The culture base of the AIVRS program, in my opinion, is the foundation that lends itself to a strong AIVRS culture. So I encourage the program directors to make it a point to share this with RSA as well as your state partners. Moving on to the next slide.
Lee, I'll let you take this one.
Okay. With this particular slide, we are sharing with the group a sample IPE that
Lee,
includes, yes,
you need to sit on your microphone.
now?
Yes, you're good.
Okay.
Don't move.
Okay, all right. With this slide, we're sharing with the participants a sample IPE that includes traditional healing services. As I pointed out, the VR program staff are in the best position to work with their consumers in the joint development of the IPE, where the consumer is given an opportunity to exercise informed choice. So when we're talking about traditional healing services, don't be in a rush to start completing the IPE. Get to know your consumer. get to know where their perspective or worldview is on where they are at in their journey in life, in their aspirations in achieving a vocation, of contributing to the community. It's so exciting to sit with the youth especially and just ask them about what their future plans are, and
Lee, we're losing you.
and also asking them what their interest is in seeking their vocational goal or their academic goal. And most of them will reply and say, when I earn my degree or my vocational certificate, my plan is to come back home to my own community and help my people. Having said that, the sample IPE provides information that the consumer's vocational goal is to obtain a certificate as a mechanic. And the timeline for the certificate program is 9 months. In this particular instance, the consumer is receiving traditional healing services due to a trauma that creates his anxiety, which in turn becomes an impediment to preparing for employment or to maintain or retain employment. So let's take a look at the IPE. The IPE sample provides the need for the consumer, the vendor who will provide the service, the cost for the service, the beginning date, and the ending date. So for this particular individual, some of the services needed would include tuition and books. In this instance, the Tribal Voc Rehab Program would be look at comparable benefits and services, and in this case, looking at the Pell Grant. Also looking at your tribal resources, your grants and scholarship office. Another need for this consumer is transportation. Who can provide for this service? Can the tribal grants and scholarship provide for this need? Is the family in a position to contribute to this need? Lodging is another need of this consumer, whether it's residing on campus in a dorm or living in an apartment off campus. Who could possibly provide for this need? In this example, we're looking at the tribe, looking at the student, as well as the family. Another need identified is tutoring. And in this instance, we would recommend that you reach out to the Disability Resource Center that's available on the school campus. Determine what they can provide for the student in terms of providing reasonable accommodation for the student in the classroom, on the university campus, as well as in the student housing.
And this is Suzanne. This is one format that has been traditionally used over time. And of course, the focus we wanted to look at was traditional healing, but all those things that Lee mentioned in terms of tribal assistance and scholarships and that sort of thing. Generally speaking, there is, remember that this is an IPE, and any costs that are put in this cost column is just an estimate. It's a budget, so it's a forecast of what's possible, and that those costs that would be noted. I know some tribes don't put an actual beginning date, an end date, My training said that we had to put fall. If fall is August 19, 2020, and the end date is spring, which would be maybe May 2021, May 19th, 2021, those dates would have to be put in there. But this is just to give you an overview of what it should look like. Yeah. Thank you for letting me interrupt, Lee.
Yes, and as you'll note on the sample, traditional healing services has been identified as a need. The vendor in this case would be a medicine man or woman.
Lee,
Yes,
we need to hear you.
okay now?
Yes.
Okay, I have to have the mic right up against my lips.
Sorry. The minute you move
Okay.
away,
All
and you
right.
move further and further away from it, we just lose you altogether. And what you have to
Okay.
say is very important. So
Yes, and we're looking at a beginning date and an ending date to allow for 2 sessions of traditional healing services for the 9-month period. And the last comment to make is that it's important to document in your case note justification for providing the traditional healing services, and also explaining how the services will affect the consumer's successful employment outcome. And in this case, the consumer receiving his mechanic certification.
before you move on, we have a couple of comments in the chat box. Is that too early, Daryl? Or
Oh, go ahead.
Rachel says, we're trying to figure out specifically how to provide traditional healing services. The consumers need to be safe, but also our healers need to be safe. Absolutely. Some ceremonies would be a challenge to participate in by Zoom, considering how to do so with distance. Also, some who may not have experienced depression or anxiety prior to COVID-19, and now we can help them address it, hopefully. Okay. Paula just said that she can hear you, Lee.
Okay.
Anyway, there is that meeting. I was having the same problem with volume and hearing and all the rest of it, and it takes a while to get it going. So you're on.
Okay. So basically, just to reiterate that last point that Lee made in the previous slide, articulating clearly, and we've seen this, and I think we're speaking from experience as AIVRTech. For those of you who have requested intensive technical assistance, when we've come in to review your cases, one of the things we often find is the connection between the IPE document and services being provided, and the articulation of that, or finding justification within your case notes. And more frequently than not, we find that there's a disconnect. So one thing, just a point of reference for programs out there, coming from a TA perspective, that's one area that we may see it in a document that Lee just shared, where we're seeing a basic list of services provided. If someone were to ever come in and review your files and ask a question, well, what was the purpose of providing traditional healing? You'd want to be able to find that in your case notes. And we provided just a brief, a general statement that, said something to the degree of that the individual receiving traditional healing services is due to trauma creating his disability, which is anxiety. The consumer requested traditional healing to address this barrier to employment. So, somehow articulating that as counselors within your case notes is very important. And of course, that's related to other services you're providing as well. It is an important point to pick up on that Lee was just presenting. So with that, it's everything that we said here on this screen. We want to justify it. Again, if we're thinking about programmatic activities, providing the providing the services and writing up the IPE between the counselor and consumer is one activity. The federal regulation supporting the description of the services and what can be provided is another entity, and then your specific program policy, I think, is the third wheel that is very important in this process. In asking, do your AIVRS program policies and procedures provide appropriate guidance, for your program staff to follow in terms of providing traditional healing services? I think that's a very important consideration as well. And we suggest that if that's not the case, at your next revision of your policy and procedure, you start to articulate that as a team and come to consensus with how you want to narrate that within your specific documents. And so with that, we do have a discussion activity. I don't believe we have time right now, but I'm going to cut and paste or copy and paste a question we'd love for all of you to respond to. And it's, it kind of gets back to what I believe, who was it, Rachel? Yeah, Rachel Allen was saying that it's very hard to provide the services right now because of technology. What are the alternatives? What are the other resources? So this question is in alignment with that when we talk about, what are some of the challenges in providing traditional healing services for tribal members with disabilities? So that is generally what we want to ask you. And then maybe if you want to add, what has COVID added to that in terms of the barriers created? We'd like to ask you to respond to that within the chat box, and then we'll revisit that as we get through the rest of the slides. So if you will, please respond to that. The question again is, what are some of the challenges in providing traditional healing services for tribal members with disabilities? Next slide, Lee. Okay, so the next slide is talking about the invoicing process in terms of points to be aware of. One, confidentiality is very important. We've run into situations where programs ask us, what do we do when we're invoicing? And the grants management or procurement office is asking for some type of connection to a consumer. We've reviewed that in many instances, I think, through various presentations about the role of confidentiality and maintaining that. The same applies here. Coming up with a system that is an alternative way of connecting that service to a consumer without using identifying information is very important. That in this case, the traditional healer is considered a vendor. But also considering alternative forms of providing payment to a healer. Sometimes, healers prefer not being paid through, the traditional cash money system. So these are things that we should be considering when you're writing up your policy statement in terms of what are the various ways we can account for invoicing. So in that respect, considering what does that process look like for programs out there in terms of the invoice process? I don't know if we have time to review that. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, because I know we'll run out of time. Slide 14. Lee, I believe this is your slide.
Okay. This one asks the question, how does traditional healing services fit into AIVRS program management? The first bullet talks about program management is guided by the purpose of the project to prepare tribal consumers for gainful employment. Is there anyone out there in the audience who knows by heart the purpose statement for the AIVRS program and can recite it for us? I recall when we used to do the grant writing workshop that this would be a question that we would pose at the beginning of the workshop. It's important that you become familiar with the purpose statement of the AIVRS program, which is included in the 371 regulation, as some wording has changed. And the change in word now include culturally appropriate services. So if you look in your current grant proposal, you should be able to determine how the purpose of the AIVRS program is talked about throughout the entirety of the grant proposal. How is it described in the design section? How does the methodology highlight the use of culturally appropriate services? How does your outreach and dissemination include culturally appropriate strategies or approaches? Traditional healing services supported by AIVRS program need to clearly describe in the grant proposal and the policies and procedures explaining guidelines for how traditional services will be provided. And some of you folks during the webinar have shared with us some of the processes that you're currently using that can lend itself to policy development. Another piece of making sure that your grant proposal is providing clarity is in your evaluation plan. How will you assess the effect of traditional healing services being provided to your tribal consumers? In your consumer satisfaction survey that you're currently using, does it have a question on traditional healing services? If so, how are you using the comments provided by the consumer to improve or expand your traditional healing services? It's important that there be an alignment between the proposal plans and the policy providing traditional healing services. It's also important to consider the value of traditional healing services and how it's communicated with the consumers, as the state VR agencies do not offer this service. In conducting community outreach activities, whether it's in person or through your website, how does the AIVRS program incorporate and demonstrate the tribal cultural background in these activities? Examples could be an opening prayer.
Lee, I'm not hearing you. I can't hear you at all.
Okay.
That's better.
Examples can include an opening prayer, smudging before the activity starts, perhaps storytelling about the role of a traditional healer.
We have some comments in the chat box, Lee.
Okay. We have time.
Okay. One is from James, and I'm going to have a problem with this because of the huge words that I know that I always trip over.
Suzanne?
He says, very good. Yes, you want to read it?
Before James,
Okay,
I believe is Chris's comment.
yes.
And I just wanted to make a quick comment about that. If you don't mind reading his
No.
and follow up with a comment.
Certainly. Challenges to pay for services. Our tribe requires that the person has a business license. There is a formal process of whom we choose so that one service provider isn't favored over another.
There's a different comment.
A different one? I
Yeah,
don't know how. Why don't you find it? Why don't you read it?
Yeah, I'll find it here. It's he says that including treatment provided by native healing practitioners who are recognized as such by the tribal rehab program. For us, there are several layers of tribal laws that require us to go through a formal process prior to choosing a certain healing practitioner. Just because our program recognizes someone as a native healing practitioner is not enough. We have to go through the tribe's process too. And I just wanted to make a quick comment that that is very important. And we indicate, you know, if you haven't accessed our, oh my gosh, what is it? Our toolkit with the, you know, it's on our website, AIVRTAC website. There's a toolkit, and we talk a little bit about this in terms of the operation of an AIVRS program within tribal governments, and how there is this consideration that Chris points out, the alignment that we also have to follow those regulations at a tribal level. Chris, thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to point that out. If you want to read more about how we recommend to address that, please access our toolkit on our website. And then you can go ahead and go with James's comment, Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. Let me find it. You could read that one too. Okay, James says, very good point that Rachel Allen made, and I don't know whether everybody is aware what Rachel said, but on that same note, looking at traditional learning or, okay, help me, Darryl.
Epistemologies.
What is it?
Epistemologies.
Epistemology. I knew I was going to say it wrong. Of American Indians, we learn specific cultural elements through our elders, uncles, aunties, grandma, etc. During COVID, how do we utilize our teachers, elders, while our children are at home? Oh my. Good question. Good. I mean, I think this is probably one I love when everybody is participating, because you can almost say each one is every comment is so important and so great. Anybody want to talk about his question or read on?
I think we can read on, and then what we might do is we'll share a little bit of another presentation coming up in the next week or so.
Excellent.
September.
Yeah.
Okay.
So going back to the one that I started reading, challenges to pay for services. Our tribe requires that if the person has a business license, there is a formal process of whom we choose so that one service provider isn't favored over another. I haven't had this problem, but I have heard from other directors about times when RSA wasn't receptive to the use of funds for cultural services. Carol Berquist, decreasing number of providers available in our geographic area, limit choice of people seeking services. Karen Johnson, I have a consumer who wants to make blankets as a part of traditional healing. He is challenged by the severe cognitive disability. He will need to be patiently taught, perhaps many times, to make blankets. He has an auntie who will help him with this. It is a long-term commitment. It requires time and travel. We must get a W-9 form from his auntie. Oh. Casey Bird, the challenge is paying for services to a traditional healer when the healer isn't known or name isn't spoken by others. If I request a check from our financial office for a medicine man and refuse to give a name, that doesn't go over very well. Mm-hmm. Amanda Rice, while we do not have healing services in our region, we can provide beads, craft materials, etc. for consumers who want to perform cultural activities. We can create purchase orders to beading first stores for them to purchase their supplies. We have used contracts to pay elders to teach younger consumers. Thank you. I don't know who to turn it over, Daryl or Lee?
I just wanted to quickly, we're going to run out of time, but I think you all have made valid points. Thank you, everyone, to our brothers and sisters out there. And we don't have a chance to respond to them all, but I think that after we present our summary, we're sharing with you that we're doing a coffee break with the TVR circle that we could follow up with some of these comments and questions on during that time. So Lee, I can turn it over to you to complete the final summary.
Can I ask a question before we do that? How do we, I know this is bad for me to be asking this, but how do we get the comments in this, these comments need to be preserved and shared? Is there a way how do we download the comments?
Yeah, there's 3 ellipses at the bottom of the chat box.
Okay.
They're horizontal. You can just click on that and it says save chat.
Bravo. Thank you so much.
Oh, one last comment. I got a message from Mary Van Winkle. Hi, Daryl. My question was on the lines you mentioned, how do you make payment to healers who received food or groceries as payment rather than monies? How do you provide payment? So we'll also take that into consideration. Thank you.
Okay.
Lee, yep.
All right. This was a very good discussion, and unfortunately, we have to come to some type of closure. So with that, in summary, what we talked about with your contribution was to better understand the parameters of the AIVRS holistic service delivery model. We've also talked about how it's important to understand that this model is consumer-centered and culturally appropriate provision of VR services is important. We also talked about how traditional healing services are defined by the tribal community, the consumer, the AIVRS program, and how RSA defines disability in its regulation. We also talked about the importance of documentation to justify why an AIVRS program is providing traditional healing services in its case management in the consumer's case files. It's also important that we respect the consumers and the traditional healers' confidentiality when procuring and paying for traditional healing services. Some of you in your different tribal communities may have valuable resources that you can tap into. I recall the Indian Health Service used to include traditional healing service as part of their treatment plan or their discharge planning. Programs like the behavior health, their substance abuse program sometimes include traditional type of healing in addressing substance abuse, so something to keep in mind. We also talked about and provided recommendation how program management guideline is important that it be documented in the AIVRS proposal, the policies and the procedures for providing traditional healing services. With about 3 minutes to go, sharing some updates regarding our webinar and talking circle schedule. On September the 3rd, Daryl, myself, and Paula Inez will be doing a 1-hour coffee break hosted by the TVR Institute, and the topic will be traditional healing services. And as Daryl pointed out, this will give us an opportunity to follow through on some of the questions or comments that you shared with us today. On September the 22nd, Daryl and I will conduct a talking circle on the same topic. And I want to remind all the participants on this webinar that every Friday we issue our AIVRTAC weekly updates, which includes schedules for upcoming webinars, talking circle. In addition, it provides a listing of previous webinars and talking circle. In addition, it also provides a schedule for any of the program that's interested in receiving technical support for better engagement in our webinars and talking circle, and this is provided by John.
Lee, can I jump in here really quick?
Sure.
Could I turn everyone's attention to the chat box? There is a survey link there before you leave. We'd appreciate if you could click and complete the survey. That would be very helpful for us in terms of your feedback. Thank you so much.
Okay, and the last slide has our contact information. Once again, thank you for your participation.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Take care. Be safe.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Casey.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
Suzanne. Bye, Daryl.
Hey, James.
Good to see you guys again.
Good to see you. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate
I'll get back to your phone call one of these days.
it. Okay, I thought you might have had a new number or something.
No, I got it, and it's one of those things.
All right. Well, hopefully KNR can happen once again and I can see you guys in person.
Yes, it's good to see you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good job.
Nope, Christopher left. I was
Good
gonna
job,
thank-
Lee. Good job, Daryl.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Go
you.
now.
Go net.
AIVRTAC staff, can you hang on after everyone gets off the line?
Yes.
We'll do a brief debriefing.
I think Jamie and Winona left already.
Okay.
So it's gonna be Daryl, you, me, and John.
Okay. Thank you, Suzanne and Daryl.
Hold on a minute.